Welcome to the program. There is the People's Bench, and we are coming to you from Game Suits here in Riverside, Nairobi. As usual, I am your host, Fred Ogweno. Tonight, I'm privileged to have Mr. Suba Churchill himself. He is the Executive Director of the Kenya National Civil Society Center and a veteran activist. He was there during the clamor for the new Constitution 2010, and he played a major role. Tonight, we're gonna talk with him, and we look at what is happening between Kenya and Tanzania. We recently saw the Kenyan activist ejected, persecuted, and deported back to Kenya from Tanzania. We wanna see what exactly is happening and where is Tanzania? Where does this put issues to do with democracy and human rights from the East African nation, that is Tanzania? How are you, sir?
Thank you very much.
Welcome to the People's Bench.
Pleasure.
Nice to have you again.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you for having me here.
Yes. Maybe I think I've done enough intro, so there may not be need unless there is something that you want to tell our visitors.
Not really.
I mean, our viewers.
Just to confirm that, yes, I've been in the sector, civil society sector for a while. As an activist, this is my 31st year. And still counting.
Yes.
And I'm involved in a number of initiatives, including the Eastern Horn of Human Rights program, which is a human rights training program that brings together the current partner states of the East African community. You are aware that the East African community has grown over the years. We started off with the three, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. But on board now are Burundi, Rwanda, DRC, Somalia, and Ethiopia has applied. Of course, South Sudan also entered the East African community a while ago. So, but regrettably, as the East African community continues to grow, there is a mismatch between growth in the number of partner states as opposed to democratic space that should characterize such, exponential growth in the number of countries wanting to join the community. We have recently witnessed a very unfortunate incidences of people being held at airports, and particularly by the authorities in Tanzania. We had, a veteran activist like myself and former Chief Justice Willy Mutunga, another activist and photojournalist, Boniface Mwangi, and a Gen Z activist, whom I would say is relatively new in the sector, Hanifa, also being held and of course deported. And of course, veteran politician and Iron Lady, as we know her here, Martha Karua. But the most unfortunate bit of those detentions and the deportations is the alleged torture of Boniface Mwangi and another lawyer from Uganda, who it is suspected, of course they have not boldly said so, and it could be a very painful experience, that she may have been sexually assaulted. And this happening after a number of partner states in the East African region have signed on to the African Continental Free Trade Area that presupposes that there should be free movement of people, occasioned a very big blot in the relations between the two countries. But of course, one would say that judging from what the political elite are saying, it would appear that our government here may have once again, cooperated with the Tanzanian authorities, just as they did with the capture and subsequent deportation of veteran opposition leader in Uganda, Kizza Besigye. You also remember that, a lady journalist who is a Tanzanian national was at one point kidnapped in Nairobi and held for a while before, pressure built, and she was subsequently released. So what we see in this scenario is a depiction of a mismatch between Kenya's democratic, development compared to those of other partner states in the region, and more particularly, all the other countries that I've mentioned. First of all, the reason why the opposition chief, Tundu Lissu, is being held and has been charged with treason in Tanzania was because he proclaimed that unless the country embarks on a comprehensive review of their constitution, then there should be no elections. So no reforms, no election is a slogan that we Kenyans, sang, several decades ago. Way back in 1992, you remember when the earnest agitation for multipartyism started. Kenyans poured into the streets, went to Kamkunji without a permit, and that became the slogan until we had the comprehensive review of the constitution, in which, I was a very key partner, playing a role as a delegate, number 463, at the Bomas Constitutional Conference in 2003-2004, and also as chairperson who adopted the 2 chapters in the Constitution on citizenship and the Bill of Rights. Yet, despite all those milestones, Tanzania still talks about their 1977 constitution, which means that, by and large, the bulk of the present constitution of the Republic of Tanzania is the one that they adopted in 1977 after coming together with Zanzibar, the coming together of mainland Tanganyika and Zanzibar. Of course, there were a few revisions in 2005 to usher in multipartyism, but despite the provision of multipartyism in their constitution dating back to 2005, Tanzania is yet to democratize the electoral process. So at the center of all this kidnapping and deportation of Kenyan activists whose main fault was trying to go and show solidarity with their counterparts in Tanzania is a constitution reform process that was started during the times of Kikwete, but which Magufuli scuttled, and that Her Excellency Samia Suluhu was the running mate of the late Magufuli, and therefore think more or less in the same manner, and therefore is not keen and knows that a reviewed constitution will open up and the space and provide an equal opportunity for all actors and contestants. And therefore, anybody who is going to show solidarity with the Tundu Lissu in custody, and as his case was being mentioned, is perceived to be an enemy of the ruling party. And if you watched the news this evening, where a number of members of parliament, including those from the stronghold areas where Chadema has strongholds, mostly around Moshi, Arusha, and the part of Tanzania that borders, Kenya along the Namanga, Namanga up to Taita Taveta borders. You could see those MPs speaking very, very strongly. And they are speaking so strongly because they know that if Chadema were to contest, some of them would not recapture their seats. So that's how high the stakes are. And therefore, you could see them expressing a lot of solidarity with their president, despite the fact that, whatever happened to the Kenyans who were held in Communicado, later deported, in fact, 2 of them in the most brutal manner, because after being tortured, they were abandoned, most likely by road, yet these are people who had air tickets. One would have imagined that if the authorities in Tanzania really did not just want those people in their territory, the most honorable thing would have been to wait for their next flight as they had booked, hold them at the airport as they did with the others, and usher them into the aircraft.
I hear you.
But that did not happen, and so we had people being dropped. We don't know how, by what means, but we want to believe by road, because none of those places where they were found abandoned is serviced by, airports and aeroplanes. Yes.
I hear you. The Kenyan activist, by crossing the boundaries and going to Uganda, to Tanzania, knowing very well that there is a different country, don't you think that they ought to have known that they were entering a new land? They were going to a different country with new laws, that they may not be able to enjoy the freedoms that they enjoy here?
You say, or you would have said that had they gone past the airports, of course, Boniface Mwangi and the lady from Tanzania, from Uganda, were picked from their hotel rooms. But even that, does not imply that they had committed any crime known to the law of the Republic of Tanzania. When you are arrested in a hotel like we are in now, we have not committed any crime. So I would not, suggest, I would not take a stand that would suggest that, it was wrong on their part or anybody's part to go to Tanzania. I'm sure it was not the first time that Boniface Mwangi was traveling to Tanzania, nor the lady a lawyer from Uganda. But the authorities in Tanzania seem to have overreacted, perhaps out of fear that perhaps these activists would have, had any intention to, to kind of foment, any animosity or incite the public to do a demonstration. But knowing Tanzania, it's very difficult to do a demonstration in Tanzania, and more so if you are a foreign national. Tanzania is one place where even in their Criminal Procedure Act, officials of Nyumba Kumi are vested with the power to arrest and can even, apply for a warrant to search and to arrest people right from the ward to all the levels until you reach the police station. So you don't have to be a police officer to arrest anybody. So there is such a very, a closely knit information gathering system in Tanzania that any visitor in a village would be, the state would know that there is a foreigner, visiting and so on and so forth. And you'd deduce that from, just engaging in a conversation with Tanzanians. I was in Tanzania recently, as recently as 3rd of May of this month, having gone there on 30th of April. And most Tanzanians do not even have the temporary travel document. Yes, we are talking about the East African community. Our own passports today, including the one that I've put on the table there, is called the East African passport. So one would assume that we surrendered our Kenyan sovereignty, so did Tanzania and all the partner states within the East African community for the common good of the East African community, and so that people can move freely. And we see a lot of that movement. If you land at the Kilimanjaro International Airport in Arusha, you see all these flags and photos of heads of state from the region, and so you get a sense of integration. Yet from the manner in which our counterparts contemporaries were treated, you get a sense that integration is only a privilege. For the heads of state and government, perhaps foreign affairs ministers and so on, and not citizens. Yet citizens, have also gone ahead and formed, platforms for, interaction, platforms to fasten integration. Because one of the reasons why, the first East African community collapsed, and researchers have pointed this time and again, was the fact that it was not citizen-driven. Citizens had not been placed at the center of the East African integration process. And that's why this time around, citizens, whether it is through the East African Human Rights Program that I'm part of, whether it is through the East African Civil Society Organizations Forum, EACSOF, that I'm also part of, and the East African Civil Society Summit that we always hold in Arusha at the Mount Meru Hotel, you know, citizens have gone ahead and integrated. And so leaders are lagging behind, held captive by fear of the unknown, and therefore resorting to some of these atrocious, you know, mechanisms that they meted out our contemporaries.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Here is President Samia Suluhu, who is scared of Tundu Lissu, and Tundu Lissu is behind bars. Then you expect him to accommodate Kenyan activists who has crossed borders and are now in his country. You expected her to smile at them when she knows very well what they were capable of doing here in Kenya during the Gen Z's Maandamano.
You know, the Maandamano itself, though spontaneous, you know, the Gen Z revolt of 2024 that peaked on the 25th of June was not an instant cup of coffee as people would want it to appear.
But she's scared.
It was a build-up, you know. It's something that had built up from the first, you know, finance bill of 2022-2023, when Kenyans, you know, voiced their concerns and the authorities ignored. I remember, you know, different chairs of committees of parliament, you know, saying these are mere suggestions. Yet those mere suggestions eventually became the part of the Finance Act of that year. So come 2024-2025, I think Kenyans had had enough of that nonsense, and they said, this time around, we are not going to allow you to pass this, you know, bill the way you'd want to impose, you know, those taxes on us. So the fear in Tanzania, in my view, was perhaps as a result of lack of sufficient appreciation of what, you know, the Kenyans who went there were capable of doing. Remember, it was not even a hearing; it was a mere mention of that case, but which, you know, seemed to have, you know, instigated a lot of reaction from the authorities. You see, even the case of Tundu Lissu, it is the High Excellency President Suluhu herself who went to Belgium and persuaded Tundu Lissu to come back. You know, Tundu Lissu escaped death narrowly, having been shot, you know, several times. I don't know how many times, but it was, you know, almost 10 times or 8, and somehow survived and went on treatment briefly here in Nairobi before, you know, proceeding to Europe. It is Samia Suluhu herself who went and persuaded him that, you know, his safety is guaranteed, and yet now the same Samia has locked him up, and so you get a sense that perhaps the reason why she wanted Tundu in the country was to be sure that he's always tethered and that kind of thing. And now, you know, even the party itself, Chadema, Chama cha Demokrasia na Maendeleo, has been banned from participating in the October elections on account of refusing or failing to sign on to some code of conduct for political parties as per some deadline that had been set by the Electoral Commission in that country.
Yes.
And so yes, the Kenyans, somebody may say, should have sensed that, you know, there's a lot of, you know, tension in Tanzania, elections being an emotive issue, but then what capacity does, you know, the former Chief Justice Willy Mutunga, does, you know, Boniface Mwangi, does Hanifa, does, you know, and Boniface Mwangi and the lady from Uganda had, you know, to disrupt even the court proceedings. So I think, and if you visit Tanzania, you know, Mama Samia started campaigning a long time ago. If you walk in the streets of any city in Tanzania, you know, you see a lot of billboards and advertisements about, you know, her achievements. Every corner you turn, mama mchapakazi, amefanya hivi na hivi. Right from the airport, you know, you encounter some of those public, you know, engagements and so on. And you don't understand why, you know, in such a situation where the October vote is all for, you know, the ruling party to lose, why she would be so scared of mere activists who are merely, you know, going to show solidarity. Yet you also question, you'd want to question why, you know, despite, you know, rejecting or refusing these others to visit, why the immediate former Chief Justice, David Maraga, was allowed, and even had a session with the Tundu Lissu. And it tells you that, there's a way in which these other, Kenyans had been profiled, and perhaps, with instruction from our own government, they said, Maraga means no harm. Even here, his campaign does not seem to register on the radar and so on and so forth. He has no history of activism. Yet everybody else, who has a history and background of activism was stopped and deported, and then some, 2 of them, unfortunately, tortured before being abandoned at the border posts.
Are you saying that the Kenyan government might have been behind the tribulation that Kenyan activists went through in the hands of security apparatus in TZ?
I mean, we saw the interview that that the Foreign Affairs and Diaspora CS, the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, had with Citizen TV, and he was kind of speaking in a way to suggest that the Kenyans who were held there and tortured deserved to be treated in the manner in which they were. Something that is very unfortunate, claiming that it is those activists who went to provoke, because he talked about, rattling the authorities in Tanzania, in a way to suggest that that it is the Kenyans who are on the wrong and therefore went to provoke the authorities. Yet, these are people who are unarmed. They had no intention whatsoever, and even if they had not had the opportunity to leave, even enter into the country, because they were at the airport, most of them, apart from the 2, Boniface Mwangi and the lady from Uganda, who were, picked from their hotel rooms. And even in that hotel room, they were not caught with paraphernalia likely to suggest that they were planning a demonstration. They were just, hoping that, waiting for the day the court would start so that they go and show solidarity. Mm-hmm. So it tells you that despite being partner states in the same East African community, the six or seven partner states are at different levels of democratic development, and therefore, causing this tension. And Tanzania in particular, seems to stand aside. It's one of the weakest links in the East African community. Tanzania is, remember, part of the SADC also, and it tends to, throw its lot with SADC as opposed to, the East African community. You and I, remember, were in Addis Ababa the other day, and there were all these, suspicion that Tanzania could have voted against, Kenya during the African Union Commission chairmanship, and therefore, that speaks volumes about their views and attitudes towards the country. Yet, here in Kenya, we have a lot of citizens, from Tanzania and across the region. They are freely doing business. A number of them hawking stuff. In fact, most of the groundnuts I eat in this city sold to by people from Burundi or Rwanda and so on and so forth. And therefore, that means that, Kenya seems to be more open, more democratic. Of course, we have also our own challenges as a country. But by and large, we seem to be a little more, democratic than our neighboring, the partner states in the East African community.
Thank you. Before I come to my final question, tell me, one would have expected that by coming in of President Samia Suluhu, who is a mother, one would have expected that things probably would change, in terms of democratization and respect to human rights. But we haven't seen that. Does it mean that it does not matter the gender of who is in power?
It's about the systems. It's about the systems in place. Remember, yes, Samia Suluhu is a lady, one of the few. In fact, currently in Africa, there are only 2 alongside, the lady was elected in Namibia Of course, we had, Salif, making history as the first elected president.
My director is reminding me that we're having 2 minutes.
Okay, Salif, broke the record in Sierra Leone.
Yes.
And got, is it here? No, Liberia. Liberia as the first, woman to be elected president. Then, of course, Samia Suluhu succeeded on account of the untimely demise of Pombe Magufuli, who died, abruptly, at the peak of COVID-19 pandemic. But it is not about the individual. It's about systems and structures. The way Tanzania's political structure and systems are established would make anyone a dictator, even the most innocent. Even if an angel, if God was to drop an angel to run Tanzania for a while, the angel would become a dictator, against even their own personal wish. And so Samia Suluhu, I think, for the duration that she's in power, remember she took over a few months, in fact, barely a year after the elections, the re-election of Magufuli as president. And so she has been there for a couple of years, and now is preparing for, her own election as president. So she has been an insider. People used to say outsider, yes, partly because she's from Zanzibar. But remember, she has been a minister in the state in Zanzibar, but also in the unity government, and has been there and has quickly learned the ropes and consolidated power in a way that she knows what buttons to press in that oppressive system to deal with a perceived or real enemy as it were.
As we wind up, where does this leave the image of Tanzania globally in terms of respect to human rights, and good governance?
Of course, this incident that, in my view was completely unnecessary and avoidable has left the international and global reputation of Tanzania as a country seriously battered. They may speak tough. I saw members of parliament speaking toughly and saying there is nothing they can learn from Kenya. Yet, some of the things they still do, are things we did, decades ago. The reasons for which Tundu Lissu is in custody, no reforms, no elections. We sang when we were students at the university. And are way beyond. There is no comparison. In fact, there is a contrast between the Kenyan constitution and that of, the Republic of Tanzania. Yet, I watched a number of the MPs saying, there is nothing they can learn. Yet, in today's world, the reality is, with integration, including the East African community and many of these international, covenants that, Tanzania signed onto, we live in a global community of nations, and there's a lot of, things to learn, a lot of benchmarking that is even ongoing, as they were saying so.
Thank you.
And we have seen a number of, politicians from Zambia and elsewhere coming, and our own going to those countries. The East African community is headquartered in Tanzania. And so Tanzania would have, one would have thought, would have done things differently as the country in which the East African Court of Justice is headquartered, the country in which, IALA is headquartered, and so on and so forth, yet, so their image has been battered, and already there are definitely a number of questions that I know their foreign affairs minister, the Samia Suluhu herself, he could already be answering and will be answering in the near future.
To whom?
We have seen, the U.S., Department for Africa posted on X and demanding for accountability for those who subjected, the two activists from Kenya and Uganda to account.
Why would the U.S., just in 30 seconds, why would the U.S. Department for Africa post on their X account instead of writing a letter, official letter to complain about what happened?
We cannot say we are in the full picture of exactly what kind of communications are ongoing, but I believe that perhaps that post on X was what the general public could see and get to know of. But I'm sure and I'm confident that there are a lot of things happening through diplomatic channels. There could be such communications already underway, even between Kenya and Tanzania, Uganda and Tanzania, because of the embarrassment that has come with those incidences. I'm sure that even as Kenya appeared to be celebrating the torture of its own citizen, and as Uganda, the Ugandan ambassador to Tanzania was lying that the lawyer had been received well by family, despite the reality on the ground. I'm sure there's a lot of diplomatic communications going on to try to normalize and clarify things, because governments do not always say things openly. There's what they'll say openly, but there's also what they'll say quietly under international pressure. And I'm sure that pressure that is on Tanzania is perhaps also on Kenya, particularly with respect to the manner in which the government appeared to have condoned that. You also saw in our own parliament the senator for Nandi, Cherargei, congratulating Samia Suluhu for dealing firmly with the Kenyan activists who, according to him, took their bad manners, exported their bad manners to Tanzania. And we have had such many unfortunate incidents from the Lagdera MP also, Farah Maalim. We have seen such comments which, in my view, are very, very unfortunate, and a sign that, our own leaders elected through elections are not, as patriotic as they ought to be.
Thank you. Thank you very much for watching. It has been the People's Bench coming to you from Game Suits here in Riverside, Nairobi. I have been your host, Fred Ogweno, with Mr. Suba Churchill, a veteran activist who has seen it all. And we had time to look at what is happening between Kenya and Tanzania. We hope to do it again when you get time. Thank you so much, Suba, for finding time.
Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure to have you on the bench.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we appreciate. Bye-bye until next time. Thank you.